Hi everyone. Ready to start? Okay. Hi guys, think it's going to be a super impressive panel on a topic which was always close to my heart. Emerging markets, always been a huge promise of Bitcoin and alternative financial systems. First I have to share an observation. Having a conference like this in a shitty market as we are now is amazing, I think. It looks like a peak market from, I don't know, 5 years ago. I don't know. So let's start with some introductions.
Hey everyone, thanks a lot for coming. So I'm Roshan, and I'm the co-founder of GoSats, which is a Bitcoin rewards app based out of India. People shop, they earn free Bitcoin. So we're building like the simplest on-ramp to Bitcoin in India.
Yeah, hello, my name is Oliver. I'm from Pouch. We are a Filipino lightning wallet provider, and we run a Bitcoin Island project in the Philippines where about 230 merchants accept Bitcoin.
Hello, my name's Obi. I'm from a company called Fedi. We are building a technology for what we call global Bitcoin adoption, with the plan to get 1 billion users onto Bitcoin from the global south or from post-Soviet regions onto Bitcoin over the coming couple of years.
What's up, everybody? I'm Youssef, founder and CEO of Paxful, and we specialize in making Bitcoin useful for the people who need it most.
And I'm Nimrod. I founded Simplex, the first and favorable on-ramp company for crypto payments. Started it in 2013, sold it about a year and a half ago, and last week quitted it. And one disclaimer, I'm not checking like what's up on my phone. I just have a list of questions. So, okay, so I want to start with some kind of a general observation. Like, if whoever from you want to pick it up, like, what's the most interesting region that you think most interests you right now in emerging markets?
Well, Obi and I love the term Global South, and in our opinion, these markets have already emerged, right? So Obi and I share the dream of uniting the entire Global South as one nation. You could split it up into regions, right? Let's keep the West out of this right now. America, Europe, Australia, let's say they're region 6. To me, region number 1 is Africa, because they need help the most. No place in the world has suffered more from economic apartheid than the peoples of Africa. Number 2, you could chalk it up to MENA right now, or India and the entire Indian subcontinent. Brother Mohammed there has some good insights there. Then there's the entire of Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the CIS countries. And every single one of these places, you see them besieged in some way or other by the currency wars. Whether it's the sanctions that have plagued Russia and CIS, the massive inflation that has plagued Latin America, or the difficulty in transaction in Africa. India, Southeast Asia have their own challenges. I'm curious, Obi, what do you think is number 1? You know what mine is, but you go first.
So I'm curious what everybody thinks, but so I ran a Bitcoin exchange for 8 years in the city of London. And I sold that last year, at the end of last year, to commit myself to all Bitcoin, all Global South, all empowering the world all the time. Now, we've built this incredible product. It's called Fedi Mint, but we won't go into the details of it now. But we spend a lot of time analyzing different markets around the world because it's a global product. It's a way of getting people off exchanges and providing a solution which is simpler than an exchange, approaching the security of first-party custody with incredible privacy. But this was the challenge. When we looked around the world, it was clear to me that there were 2 regions that, amongst all of them, were the most interesting. And not just for custody and payments, for various reasons. And those 2 regions are Latin America and Africa. Now, Asia is very interesting, but as you can see, there are a lot of people who are dealing with that region. So we didn't think we needed to focus our effort there because a lot of people are doing that. Similarly for North America and Europe, there are a lot, the majority of Bitcoin companies are based there and focused there. But where we see the most growth, where we see the most need, where we see the most understanding but not being served is Latin America and Africa. So although we are a global product, that's where we are deploying resources in the most, at the most level. I just came back, I think 4 or 5, I lose track because I travel a lot. I think it was 4 days ago, I was in Kenya, and a month ago I was in El Salvador. And it's just incredible the level of adoption there. What's really interesting, and so I don't go on about Fediment, there's really interesting things happening as well in terms of Bitcoin mining, and in terms of development, engineering. So I'm a board member for B-Trust, which was a fund set up by Jack Dorsey and Jay-Z to find incredible Bitcoin developers, but from the global south, starting in Africa. And there's this incredible development community of people who are willing and able to help develop open source Bitcoin protocol technology, which is used by everybody everywhere. So we're moving from a stage where the global south is going to be the thing that powers Bitcoin as opposed to Bitcoin empowering global south. We are also seeing with Bitcoin mining, again, we can go to that in a follow-on question, but I can foresee a future in 10 years' time where one of the fastest growing Bitcoin mining sectors of the world will be in Africa for various reasons. Just take Ethiopia alone. I talked to one energy developer there who's just been given a grant for approaching, I can't actually say the numbers, but a very large amount of power. And that has the potential to be a significant percentage of all Bitcoin mining volume. But it's all 100% hydro, because the default simplest to access energy source in Africa is hydro or wind or solar. Nuclear is not very easy to access, and hydro is abundant. In fact, Ethiopia is known as the Saudi Arabia of Africa, but for hydro.
Yeah, so for me, I would say the regions I'm most excited about Bitcoin adoption would be the Middle East and Southeast Asia, because for our company, we focus a lot on the Philippines, and most Filipinos either work in the United States, but of course, we have a lot of Bitcoin companies working there. And I think seeing all the Bitcoin companies like OpenNode and I think CoinCorner right now are working in the UAE, and that is something our company is very excited about, because that are the biggest markets for all the Filipinos, and our focus on our companies to bridge the gap with remittances, because right now I think about 7% of the Philippines doesn't have a bank account, and to have partners in those regions to help with remittances to the Philippines is something we are very excited about.
Yeah, I agree with Ray and Obi as well. Like, it's really exciting for the Latin American and the African markets, and I think they will kind of like show the rest of the world how they live with Bitcoin. I mean, so I come from India, and of course, there's a lot of talk about India being like this new, this really great tech hub and possibly adoption of Bitcoin. But there's no, but what I see is that there's no burning need right now, because India's payment infrastructure it's really good. So we have this thing called UPI, which is like a unified payments interface, and now the government is taking this to other countries, and that's the reason why they kind of like see this whole Bitcoin and all these other cryptos as like a threat to whatever they are building. So
that's a fantastic point. That was supposed to be my next question. Like, do you see Bitcoin as opposing the government, opposing the regime, alternative financial system undermining their powers, and then it comes and contradicts your need to be regulated when you're coming to work, especially in new territory? So how do you handle this contradiction?
I mean, yeah, I mean, of course, like, but I think even the regulators know that. They know that this is kind of like undermining whatever they are doing. But right now, they're not thinking too much into it. They're thinking like they were hoping that this will die down. So I've been talking to regulators in India at least for like 8 years, and every 3 or 4 years the narrative is changing. So first they were like, oh, this is just going to go away. Like you go to a conference, you ask the central bank governor, you know what? There's a new thing called Bitcoin. Oh, it's a scam. It's going to go away. It's like a thing. And then they started taking it a little seriously. So they're hoping it dies down, but
still now.
Yeah. Sorry.
Still now. I mean, it's been over a decade.
Yeah. So just about a couple of months ago, when the market crashed, the governor of the Reserve Bank of India made a statement that people want us to regulate this asset class, but they do not understand that if the market crashes, the Indian sentiment is such that we like to blame people. The whole thing about Bitcoin is that if something goes wrong, who do you go and catch? So a lot of Indians have this mindset, like, can I hold somebody accountable? And that's what the governor said, like, if we regulated this market, they would think that we caused the crash. So they're like, we do not know what's going on. We'll follow more of a wait and watch approach and see what rest of the world is doing. And I mean, they're going on a different path. Like just a week ago, they rolled out this paper about a central bank digital currency, which is crazy, to be honest. But they're going down a different path. And we kind of like hope that Bitcoin will fight its own battle, and once they see that this is something else, and hopefully they come along this way.
I think there's a significant risk that many regulators will provide or put in place ever more onerous, ever stronger regulation, to the point where it will be difficult to run a centralized service like your services. We've seen this happening all over the world. I spent 8 years educating regulators, Bank of England, Department of, just various departments, from intelligence agencies, some unnamed, all the way through to members of parliament giving evidence in front of the Treasury Select Committee and all this sort of stuff. And now I still do the same thing, but I just came back from Strasbourg to Parliamentary Assembly, Council of Europe. But the difference is here, we've built a technology which is regulation-proof from the get-go. It's designed to be something that can function without having to require regulation. Because it's based on the assumption that if you are going to the people who you are potentially reducing or limiting the power of, who currently have unlimited power, they may not like it. I like the saying, turkeys do not vote for Christmas. And if you have a business plan that assumes that turkeys are going to vote for Christmas, you may end up having a bad day at some point in the future. So that's why although it's still a great business, and I think in certain markets this may not happen. In fact, I sold my company to Coin Corner, actually, at the end of last year. I am much happier now, still advocating, but with the purpose of trying to put in sensible regulation, knowing that whether you put it in or not, it has no effect on the business. And if you want to roll something out globally, the biggest thing that can slow down your ability to do that is to have to kowtow or talk to multiple regulators. Or by all means talk to them, but not be controlled by them.
How do you handle, though, countries where regulation just haven't caught up yet? And I'm assuming, like just your previous visits in different countries. I'm guessing it's very different between Kenya and El Salvador. El Salvador already has kind of an infrastructure. We can debate if it's good or bad. Kenya, I'm assuming, doesn't have much. From my experience, Nigeria has huge demand for Bitcoin and has huge financial issues.
Kenya's a very developed market. You can speak about Kenya as well. It's very developed.
It is. Kenya is a very developed market. Kenya is the gateway to Eastern Africa. That's 400 million people that need help. So strategically, we in the space should be looking very hard at Kenya. Nigeria is the lion of Africa and perhaps the lion of the world. I think God put a little something extra into the Nigerian people, which I'm very respectful and admirative of. Tremendous business acumen, tremendous potential, while their government has been trying to stop them in ways that we can't imagine. They have been working and building a movement to pioneer Bitcoin for real use cases before our very eyes. I think it's the financial story of the decade. But you know, your first question was great. I want to give a little bit of insight there.
Great.
You're asking good questions, brother. Don't get too spicy now, though. This could get out of control real quick.
Let's do it.
So let's look at the journey of everyone here. We've all had our journeys through, right? Obi, my man over here, has been knee-deep in the city of London, which is, in some cases, the financial capital of the world, been fighting the fight on the ground. Previously, yes. He's since broken away and gotten much better at surfing and serving the global south. I am still in the thick of things over in America, going, you know, dancing with Uncle Sam. And I'll tell you, an American company cannot serve the 100%. There's absolutely no way. We have to accept this and move on. Now, that being said, should we be so concerned with regulation? Is it really that big of a threat to us and what we're doing? If you think about it adversarially, and there was an excellent talk about adversarial thinking in Bitcoin, whenever you're in a fight, right, you're getting attacked from the front, which is regulation, but you're also getting attacked from the side and from the back, and those are often a lot more concerning, right? The attacks from the sides are the rampant manipulation within our very own scene. The speculative narrative that is still dominant, which is highly toxic. These things hurt. What's even worse are the attacks from behind us, the corruption of our own Bitcoin maximalist infantry and the toxicity thereof. It's up to us as the stewards of this movement to guide that narrative, to make sure things don't spiral out of control, to make sure the spooks don't get a leg up on us. But if I would like to for a minute, your daughter is very cute, by the way. I'd like to give us all a little bit of a history lesson right now. What we're doing right now, has it happened before? And what can we learn from the past? And indeed it has. You know, 1400 years ago, the Roman Empire did not allow agency. You know, there was trade back 1400 years ago. Brothers were loading up ships with carpets from Iran, selling them in Milan, buying, you know, wine and moving it to Carthage, all this and all that. But the Roman Empire did not allow third-party payments. So how do you run a large trade network without people being able to trade on your behalf and to make payments to people that you're not directly connected with? This is what the traders at the time had to deal with. And they pioneered a system called hawala, which is just the Arabic word for money transfer, right? And hawala still exists to this day. It's particularly huge in India, right? So what happened was very interesting. This network of people, particularly Muslim traders, built this peer-to-peer trading network where people could send money on behalf of each other. And the basis of this network, they didn't have a decentralized ledger back then. They just had this book, the Quran, which was their own immutable ledger, and they built it off the trust imparted by that. Fast forward now 1,400 years later, we're trying to do the same thing because the central banks of the world don't like agency. They don't like third-party transfers. They consider that money laundering. But the biggest problem in the world is economic apartheid, right? And where it gets us is not just access to credit and lending, it gets us on the transmission side, right? I spent 6 months trying to open up a bank account in Dubai before I could make my first payment because their service sucked, and that goes for banks everywhere. This is the problem we have to serve because we're in financial services, and nowhere does people need it more than Africa, Latin America, right? In Latin America, they're under attack right now. Their currency, whether it's Venezuela, Argentina, is rapidly depreciating. Colombia has just seen the highest inflation ever, and they're worried it might be the next Venezuela. So they're screaming for help, and they're not waiting for us in the West to come over and help them. They're making their own moves. And Nigeria has been doing this for the past 7 years. So that's where we should be focused, guys. I'll stop talking now.
No, continue. I think it's interesting. I think it's it's touching a few points. First of all, I don't think we can actually fight the narrative of speculation, and we should just accept the fact that it's there. It's just like, I mean, it's the shit we brought with us from the old financial systems. All of them, by the way, trading, front running, all this crap has, migrated with us. Because let's face it, a lot of the people who came into the crypto ecosystem came from finance. No offense, Obi. So we brought a lot of that crap, but I think we all share the narrative of a completely alternative financial system without all that shit. And again, I go back to the previous question. If we're striving to achieve a full alternative financial system which can hugely serve emerging markets, how do we make this jump? Because the governments of many places in emerging markets aren't really looking forward to that point in time. They try to keep everything in control. So how do we settle that dilemma?
I think you need to make that jump. As I said before, you have to build the basic steps, the basic bricks of it have to be decentralized from the get-go. If they're not, then you run into challenges.
But then they lose control, and they don't want to lose control. That's why they like M-Pesa, because they're in control about everything.
Okay, but that's always the case with any disruptive technology. The incumbents don't want to give up control. As I mentioned before, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, but Christmas still comes along as long as it's inevitable. And the way you can make it inevitable in Bitcoin terms is build technologies that are censorship resistant. So, for example, you make the code open source so that if someone took down the developer, the code is out there in public, anyone else can carry on. You do not rely on banks to provide your services. So you have to think, well, what are the different elements we need? We need a way to custody without relying on banks. That's what Fediment is. It was invented a few years ago, but that's what it provides. You also need privacy. You cannot have a situation where you have billions of users using a system and one company has full visibility on all their transactions. There's no difference to one country having full visibility. It's still an Orwellian nightmare. So you have to have privacy by default. So once you decide, I want a system which is censorship resistant, cannot be stopped, it's inevitable, you then realize what you have to do. It has to be bulletproof. So that's regulatory bulletproof. There are certain exemptions in pretty much every country in the world around regulation. And they are there because if you don't include those exemptions, then it will be nearly impossible for a regulator to manage. So for example, if we have a pre-existing relationship and I'm performing a financial transaction with you and I'm not making money and you're not losing money from it, then that in almost every reasonable jurisdiction.
That was a key word, reasonable, because many of the jurisdictions aren't reasonable, especially when it comes to crypto.
North Korea might be all bets are off, but in the vast majority. Because the reason why, let's imagine for this young girl here, and her mother is holding money in a piggy bank for her. Imagine she had to be regulated as a bank, and every parent had to be regulated as a bank for holding money for their kids. Or imagine you were going to the shop with your friend, and for your friend, and they gave you some money to buy something for them. So on the way to the shop, can you buy this chocolate bar? I saw this chocolonely thing here. It looks incredibly calorific, but for example, a chocolonely. Well, would you want to regulate them as a money transmitter or a payment institution? Imagine the multi-$1,000, multi-year overhead just to go. So you have to make an exemption for transactions between second-party relationships, i.e. pre-existing relationships where you're not making money. For example, take advantage of that exemption. If you were not to make that exemption, a huge swathe of things would also come into regulation.
But you evoke reason as the major driver of regulation, and again, to my experience, in many times it's not really the case.
No,
they want to retain control.
It's not about reason, it's about practicality. Whether it's reasoned or not doesn't matter.
Because they don't have to prosecute you if you bought chocolate.
At the moment they
bar
try
to
to
your friend.
prosecute, that's when organizations that are well-funded like ours can step up and say, okay, we're waiting for that, let's now have the court case. Because you're going to have to explain why this is different from that. And when you talk to the judges, they are all about reason. Because generally most jurisdictions, again, reasonable jurisdictions, have a separation of powers between the
In emerging
judiciary-
countries as well?
In most jurisdictions.
That's an interesting question. What makes a reasonable jurisdiction and an unreasonable jurisdiction? I'd like to give out two examples. Let's look at America and let's look at Nigeria, right?
Good example.
Yeah. So what's happening in America right now? I just saw a Twitter post a couple weeks ago where a brother who was trading peer-to-peer, on exchanges like Local Bitcoins and Paxful, he had to serve, I think, 16 months in jail. Why? Because he sold some Bitcoin for a bank transfer. He used his wife's bank account. It's a perfectly legitimate transaction. He even had an MSB license, which is the Federal Money Transmission License in the United States. And they tried to get him and his wife on 35 years in prison. He managed to bargain them down to just him in 16 months in a correctional facility. What happened there? Their thing was, oh, you have an MSB license, but you don't have an MTL in the state that you're in. And we saw a couple hops down the line, this guy that you traded with was involved in some lottery fraud. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Sounds like a bad lawyer, frankly.
It sounds like a system that is engineered to go after peer-to-peer traders, right? Now, this is particularly frightening to me because first words of the Bitcoin white paper are peer-to-peer electronic cash. If you're smart, you'll remember we're in a peer-to-peer industry. That's why Obi sold his centralized exchange, is now building a pure peer-to-peer bulletproof system on Fedimint. Great. But Uncle Sam does not care. I would say that's unreasonable. I've met 2 senators in the past few months working on some excellent regulation for Bitcoin in the United States, but the truth is it'll be at least 3 years before we have anything there. And hopefully the DOJ will stop going after simple peer-to-peer traders trying to do the right thing and getting them on technicalities. That's not cool. Let's look at Nigeria. When I say Nigeria, everyone thinks scammers. Everyone thinks corruption, right? Well, I'll tell you, I went there and I met the Nigerian regulators. We met the EFCC. They're like the SEC of Nigeria. People in Nigeria say, oh, they're the tax man. They don't like them. But they were quite reasonable, and they said, hey, you're the first Bitcoin crypto people that even came over and said hi to us. They were so happy to see us, right? And they were actually quite reasonable. So Nigeria, quote unquote, corrupt Nigeria, the regulators there were actually quite reasonable. And let's put the regulators aside for a moment, because honestly, if we just find a way to incentivize them, to allow them to, quote unquote, wet their beaks a little bit with tax system or whatever it might be, that might all go away. So in that sense, they're much more reasonable. Let's look at the people of this place, right? The people of Nigeria simply won't take no for an answer. The youth there are ready to move forward in a way that I've never seen. And we see the same thing in Kenya. We do the same thing in places like Egypt and Latin America. You brought up M-Pesa, which is a great example, right? The telcos are doing it the right way. They're focused on the right path. We here in Bitcoin crypto land, we're still trying to replace banks with wallets. It's legacy thinking. Is that really the path to get us to 1 billion citizens across the entire global south? It's not. We need to look at the telcos. Look at M-Pesa. M-Pesa is the money system that was started by Safaricom. They're the biggest telco in Kenya. They're a massive conglomerate, right? And the regulators are quite worried about them. So there's a lot of room for us to go in there and work some magic and also learn from them. Safaricom did not ask for permission. They didn't go to the regulators and say, hey, we're going to allow people to send money along with those text messages, right? 94% of all African payments happen over USSD. It's interactive SMS that happens on those gray menus, right? They just did it. It caught massive saturation. 94% of Kenyans all have M-Pesa wallets and they use them. And now they're number one and they're making things happen. We have to be the same way. The good thing about our industry is that, especially in the Global South, we don't have to go in first and ask for permission. We just have to build the best product, offer the best service, and not worry about the technicalities, and the rest will come because, honestly, I found those regulators to be a lot more reasonable than the West.
I'll give you a different angle on this in terms of how it can progress. Specifically Kenya. I've invested in a Bitcoin mining company in Kenya, and I went over to see their operation. Now, this company focuses specifically on rural East Africa. And what they do is, imagine you have much of Kenya, for example, much of the people of Kenya still live in rural parts of Kenya. And because they do not have access easily to grid power. So they have to still rely on kerosene and paraffin, which is noxious, it's bad for the lungs, it's dangerous. There's stories, I was talking to local villagers of people kids knocking over these kerosene containers, causing fires. It's expensive. You have to travel to the local town, which could be a 2-hour journey either way, and it's also really bad for the environment. So local entrepreneurial young men and women think about the idea of using Kenya's natural abundant resources, solar and in particular hydro, to create these micro hydro plants, not these huge operations, but small ones enough to power these local villages. They go to the banks to get a loan using the traditional system, and the banks say no. Now, the reason they say no is because their customers are an unknown quantity, as these villages with no credit history. And so even though actually they want to help, they cannot help because it just doesn't make financial sense. So we come in, or this company comes in, it's called Gridless, and it acts like an anchor tenant. In the same way in small town America or small town Netherlands, you will have shopping malls, and they have anchor tenants like cinemas. They always have a big cinema or a big supermarket, a Macy's or a Walmart or whatever. I think a Monop, I thought I saw one there, I'm not sure. But, and they act like an anchor tenant to guarantee 1/3 or so of the rental income to make it investable. So Gridless comes in as a Bitcoin miner and says, instead of, say, 50 kilowatts, which would be enough to power the village, you've got abundant hydro here. Why not make it 70, 75 kilowatts? It actually costs almost no more to make it slightly larger. And we will take the 20 to 25, but we now have 10 years of history Bitcoin mining, selling a product that's been on sale for 13 plus years, 24/7 in a global market. And we act as the anchor tenant. You go back to the bank, and it goes from unviable, uninvestable, to viable and investable. The young local entrepreneur gets the loan. The villagers get clean, renewable, inexpensive, safer electricity. And this has just happened. I saw their first plant. It was built a year ago. Now they're working on a 500 kilowatt plant just 3 or 4 kilometers away for 4 more villages. And they hope to do another plant for 16. We had people coming over from Mali, one of the largest producers of solar energy in West Africa. He saw this, he wants to bring it back. We had representatives from Ethiopia who are responsible for many, many megawatts worth of power, who saw this, wanted to bring it back. We have interest from Rwanda. So what's going to, and whereas we had also representatives from Texas, who are friends of mine, been Bitcoin mining since 2010. And what they were impressed by was the speed at which decisions could be made. And the reason decisions can be made quickly is because you are accelerating the electrification of rural East Africa by accelerating the adoption of renewables. And it's only possible because of Bitcoin mining, and it's very clear it's from 0 to 1. Now, when you're seeing all of this new knowledge, new income, safety, things that governments want to see happen, but are not able to do happen, and they know it's only possible because of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, imagine what that's going to do to people's attitudes around Bitcoin in the government. And also, you effectively, just like you have coal mines and gold mines in the past, what happens when you have a gold mine or a coal mine? A community forms around it. People learn new skills. Net migration away from there stops. In fact, people come to that place because it's now I can learn these high-end skills that are applicable anywhere in the world. I don't need to move from this paradise that I'm living in. I have electricity. I have obviously water because it's hydropower. And so you form, a community forms around there, and it's producing this gold, this digital gold. So some people start to accept payment in their gold, and natural economy forms. And so we're seeing this happen, and I can imagine in 2 or 3 years' time, there'll be hundreds of these, which are providing water, electricity, digital gold, education, and also they also are a nexus for internet, because they need internet, so they just provide it via Wi-Fi for anybody who's within a few hundred meters as well.
I think that's a phenomenal story, and literally phenomenal. And like, what else, which other huge opportunities like this one you guys see, and maybe we'll let these guys talk a bit more. What do you guys see as I mean, we're entrepreneurs, at the end of the day, most of us aren't just philanthropic with what we do. We do want to make something big, something impactful, and also make a buck. So what do you guys think are the major opportunities that emerging markets have to offer?
Especially when it comes to India, I think there's one great thing, at least for Bitcoin, because like all of you would know, like India loves gold, right? Like people just go gaga over gold everywhere. And I think that there's like a huge opportunity in at least people trying to understand Bitcoin as a new kind of a digital gold that would help the whole ecosystem to thrive. Now, if you look at all the other platforms like your Facebooks and your Googles and stuff, India is either the first or the second largest user base. And a lot of these platforms are what it is because of the tech-savvy customers that are in India. Like more than 65% of the population of like 1.3 billion people are under the age of 40. So there's a lot of talent, and which a lot of companies and projects are trying to get. So I really think, like, you know, I mean, and also like India there's a lot of shitcoinery around. There's a lot of Web3 stuff, especially if you look at like Ethereum. Like I think the second largest developer market is in India. So there's a lot of that, but I still think there's like a really huge opportunity to kind of like see Bitcoin as this new digital gold, and something even the government also agrees with. They like it to be classified as an asset. There is some level of understanding about regulating this thing as an asset class, but trying to restrict the payment phenomena of it. But at least it's a set to something. But yeah, it's definitely a huge opportunity in my opinion.
Yeah, so when it comes to the Philippines, the regulations there is a bit unclear, to be honest. It's kind of up in the air, but we are, you know, following the laws that are provided us currently. But when it comes to the opportunities within the Philippines, I think the biggest opportunity is the remittance market. As I think it's the fourth highest country which relying on remittances for the economy. I think it's about $60 million a day just from the US coming in to the Philippines. So our goal with Pouch is more to just connect everyone in the Philippines and the family abroad to just send home money, but also showing them that instead of just sending home money, they can also just accept Bitcoin all over the Philippines to just have it as a means of payment. Because with the people that's so unbanked in the country, just having a simple payment system is something that's kind of revolutionary for them. So when it comes to regulations, I'm probably not the best guy to talk about it. That would be our CEO. But from my understanding, it's kind of up in the air, but we are open to talk about regulations with the regulators if we ever get a chance to.
There's 4 opportunities. All of them are huge. One is knowledge work. Increasingly, we are seeing the reduction in cost to produce physical items and the increase in the cost to produce digital items. Case in point is Bitcoin. It's a digital item that's value is continuing to rise. Digital items will go up in value, but they can be provided by anyone, anywhere in the world. This is things like B-Trust. We are educating people to the highest levels. We're locating, educating, and remunerating them to work on one of the most important set of projects, i.e. the Bitcoin open source ecosystem in the world. And that knowledge then gets spread out. They become entrepreneurs locally, and they have the skills to be able to provide any service that anyone could provide here, but being willing to be paid a quarter, a fifth, a tenth of the salary. That's going to lead to this massive influx in competition around that. And the net winners of those will be people from the global south. The second is remittance, as mentioned. Remittance is a huge market. It is ranging from reasonable to very expensive if it's implemented on Bitcoin rails using technologies that are out or about to come out in the next few months. That cost of remittance could be brought down by orders of magnitude. So that's the next. I've already mentioned mining. This is a multi-billion approaching eventually a trillion plus market. And I think the biggest beneficiaries are people who are going to need massive increases in their use of energy. Because Bitcoin, if you take 10 years out in the future, every Bitcoin mining company will be subsumed into energy production companies. There won't be a separation. An energy company will be doing Bitcoin mining, especially if they're renewable, because you have this increasing need to regulate your power. You have large energy companies right now we've talked to who, when they have too much solar energy companies, when they have too much solar hitting, they cannot push that onto the network. They cannot just store it. And if they push it on the network, everybody's devices would blow up. So you have to just use that energy. And the way you would do that is what they do currently is spend millions on devices which boil water just because they have to do something with the energy. Now, if you had something which could be located anywhere and could give you money for your energy, buy when you have no other buyer, there used to be 2 of these, but about a month ago, it went down to 1. And now there's only one viable option of being a buyer of last resort. And that is a multi-billion-dollar operation. And now every Bitcoin miner has been waiting till we went from 2 to 1. And now we're going to be talking about it with every single governor in the world. And the third is providing basic financial services to anybody, anywhere in the world. And you can only do that if you are outside of regulation, because you are competing with the regulated system. And turkeys do not vote for Christmas. If you have to ask for permission from your competitor to compete with your competitor, you're going to have a bad conversation.
Ray. We have just a couple of minutes, so.
Yeah. So I started something called Built with Bitcoin. It's a giving organization, and we built 11 schools so far around the world. Our first 2 were in Rwanda, 2 in Nigeria, 2 in Kenya, 1 in El Salvador, now 2 in South Africa as well. I got the idea after I helped rebuild the school in New Orleans, and it showed me the power of education. The good news is that all these schools also have wells, and what we found was that the wells could become water distribution centers, and they could actually become profitable and ROI, and we could build more of them. And that's what we've already done. So we hope to build wells all throughout Africa with this system, including launching these jerry cans that are very well made and very helpful to the people. So my dream is to build 100 of these schools built with Bitcoin. So water and education are important. The question is, how do you make them sustainable so they can continue to grow? We figured out how to do it with water, which is very exciting because the average young African living in rural areas, the firstborn, He can't go to school because he spends 6 hours of his day fetching water. Now we have a chance to fix that. How to make it sustainable on the education side, that is one for all of us to put our heads together on and fix. What Obi said, he said a lot of good things, very interesting things, especially about power. You know, there's a lot of room to make all this happen. I don't have all the answers right now, but I think we're on the verge of something absolutely massive. I think what we're looking at now is almost the coming, hockey stick for this golden age that will be led by the global south, by young people that are ready to move forward. There are 6 billion humans in the global south. The majority of them are young people, and they have no animosity towards the past. There's no racism, there's no bitterness. They're just ready to move forward. And what we've seen is if we just let the money flow, these young people will create their own wealth. They don't need a handout. And there are all these vectors for us to add tremendous value, whether it's water, education, power, remittance, massive things. All it requires is people to build products around all the tools that we have. And we have the tools, right? We have the internet, we have mobile phone adoption, we've got Bitcoin, peer-to-peer electronic cash. How are we going to make it all come together? I think we have a good start. But the next 7 years are really going to define us. And those of us that are really willing and able to put our boots on the ground and get the real work done, you've got to go to places where others are not willing to go. And that means the global south. That is where the winners are. And you have to be focused on the winners if you want to win.
Fantastic. Do we have time for questions or anything? We're done. No? Okay. Thank you guys. It's been really fantastic. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.